There was a time when the name Mel Gibson echoed through Hollywood like a war cry, fierce, untouchable, and electric. From the brutal battlegrounds of Braveheart to the tortured soul of The Passion of the Christ, Gibson wasn't just acting, he was bleeding on screen. A heartthrob, a rebel, a genius, a man adored by millions. And then, all at once, he became something else entirely. A shadow, a scandal, a cautionary tale. Now at 70, Mel Gibson lives in a strange silence. A man who once ruled the world, reduced to whispers and sideways glances. But how did it all fall apart? Was it the industry that betrayed him? Or did he betray himself? Behind the smirk and the silver beard lies a life few truly understand. A lifetime marked by unbearable loss, public disgrace, private demons, and the kind of redemption that never quite came. He lost friends, family, his fortune, and, perhaps worst of all, the respect of the very audience that once worshipped him. This is not just a story of fame lost. This is the unraveling of a man once seen as Hollywood royalty. And what's most heartbreaking, he may never recover what he once had, because what happened to Mel Gibson could happen to any of us. Before the scandals, before the headlines, before the world turned against him, Mel Gibson was the face of Hollywood's golden rebellion. He didn't just arrive in the industry, he exploded into it. With piercing blue eyes, a devil-may-care grin, and a smoldering intensity that could light up any scene, Mel was destined to be more than just another actor. Born in 1956 in Peekskill, New York, he was the sixth of 11 children. After moving to Australia in his youth, he carried with him a curious mix of American ambition and Australian grit. That mix would eventually give rise to something unforgettable. Mad Max. A low-budget Australian film turned global phenomenon. Mad Max made Mel Gibson a cult icon. Fearless, violent, magnetic. He wasn't just playing a post-apocalyptic anti-hero. He was one, forged in real-life pain and early hardship. But this was only the beginning. The 1980s saw him transition from cult fame to full-fledged stardom. With Gallipoli, the year of living dangerously, and Lethal Weapon, Gibson proved he could do it all. Historical dramas, war films, action thrillers, romantic leads. Hollywood fell in love. Fans adored his vulnerability just as much as they did his volatility. And behind the scenes, he was a devoted Catholic, a father of 7, and a man who, at least on the surface, seemed grounded. But there were early cracks, subtle at first. A deep intensity that sometimes slipped into something darker. A sense of isolation even when surrounded by fame, and a tendency to retreat into silence or rage when pressure mounted. Still, no one wanted to see the signs. He was Mel Gibson, the golden boy. Untouchable. Then came Braveheart, a project no studio believed in, but Gibson fought for anyway. Not only did he star in it, he directed it. And when it won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, the industry finally saw him not just as a star, but as an auteur. This wasn't just a career peak, it was a cinematic coronation. But what the cameras never showed was how much of himself he had poured into that film. The long hours, the physical toll, the emotional weight of telling a story about a man torn apart by love, betrayal, and war. It mirrored Mel's own internal chaos more than anyone realized. Following Braveheart, he seemed unstoppable. He founded Icon Productions to have more creative control and avoid the politics of the studio system. But with more power came more pressure and less accountability. In 2004, he released The Passion of the Christ, a self-financed religious epic that shattered box office records and divided audiences worldwide. It was deeply personal, passionate, and polarizing. Critics attacked it. Supporters hailed it. And in the middle stood Mel, equal parts prophet and pariah. But even then, few could have predicted how rapidly things would begin to unravel. The man who once walked red carpets with kings and queens of cinema was now becoming something else entirely, a figure of controversy, whispered about behind closed doors. As Mel entered his 50s, the tides began to shift. Rumors swirled. Public behavior changed. There were glimpses of someone in pain, lashing out, breaking down. For decades, he had played the role of the tortured hero. Now, life was starting to imitate art. The weight of fame, creative obsession, and buried trauma was slowly crushing the man who once stood taller than the rest. And while the world still clung to the image of the fearless warrior, Mel Gibson was quietly beginning to fall apart. Mel Gibson's fall from grace wasn't a slow fade into irrelevance. It was a brutal, public crash that left the world in shock. In 2006, everything changed. A late-night DUI arrest in Malibu became international news, not just because of the crime, but because of what he said during it. Anti-Semitic remarks, slurred speech, anger that felt completely unhinged. The man who once gave rousing speeches in Braveheart was now giving the media fuel for character assassination. Hollywood recoiled. Studios distanced themselves. Friends stopped calling. In a single night, decades of work, admiration, and goodwill were nearly obliterated. But the truth is, Mel had been unraveling long before the cameras caught it. Behind the scenes, Gibson had long struggled with alcoholism, something he later admitted had haunted him for years. He had battled addiction quietly, hiding behind charm and charisma, but when the mask slipped, it revealed a man in deep turmoil. The press tore him apart. Headlines called him a disgrace. Late-night hosts mocked him. The industry, once his playground, now shut its doors. Mel issued apologies, entered rehab, and disappeared from the public eye. But the damage was done. His name was now a punchline, his legacy rewritten in ink soaked with scandal. Yet behind every exposed flaw was a man fighting demons that few ever truly understood. By 2010, when secretly recorded audio tapes of a vicious argument between Gibson and his then-girlfriend Oksana Grigorieva surfaced, the final nail seemed hammered into the coffin. His voice, furious, cruel, and broken, was played across every news network in the world. Even those who once defended him couldn't look away from what they were hearing. The controversy deepened. There were allegations of abuse, legal battles, restraining orders. To the outside world, Mel Gibson had become a monster. But few saw the internal wreckage that had led to that moment. A man once filled with purpose was now drowning in a toxic mix of regret, isolation, and unresolved trauma. And yet, even in the darkest hour, there were whispers of a comeback. Gibson never stopped working, even if the spotlight refused to follow. He took small roles, directed low-budget projects, and quietly began to rebuild what had been lost. But trust, especially in Hollywood, isn't easy to earn back. Years passed, and for many, the name Mel Gibson still triggered controversy more than craft. The tragedy wasn't just that he had fallen, it was that many believed he no longer deserved a second chance. If you've made it this far, consider giving this video a like, subscribing for more powerful Hollywood stories, and dropping your thoughts in the comments. Has Mel Gibson been unfairly judged? Or did he destroy his own legacy? Let us know below. Redemption is a complicated concept in show business. Some stars are forgiven instantly, others never are. For Mel Gibson, forgiveness seemed just out of reach, but through it all, he never played the victim. He owned up to his mistakes, faced the backlash, and continued to work on himself, often away from the cameras. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about survival. Every step he took post-scandal wasn't toward stardom, but toward becoming a man he could live with again. And that quiet journey is perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all. Because Mel Gibson's fall wasn't just about Hollywood. It was about what happens when the weight of pain, addiction, and silence becomes too heavy to carry alone. As the years passed and the storm clouds of scandal began to thin, Mel Gibson remained a man stuck between two worlds. The towering legend he once was, and the deeply flawed figure many now saw him as. Redemption wasn't offered to him on a silver platter, and he didn't ask for it either. Instead, he quietly chose to rebuild his life away from the center of the fire. Yet even in exile, Gibson was never truly free from the war that raged within him. His mind, his heart, and his past all continued to haunt him. The intensity that once brought his characters to life on screen now seemed to eat away at his spirit behind the scenes. Some who worked closely with him in his later years described him as focused, even gentle, but with a haunted look in his eyes, like a man who could never fully forgive himself. What many didn't know was that Mel Gibson had always lived with shadows. He suffered from episodes of severe depression, and his internal battles were often made worse by fame's crushing spotlight. As a devout Catholic with deeply personal religious views, He carried spiritual guilt that many of his peers could never relate to. The contradiction was devastating. He believed in salvation, but wasn't sure he deserved it. He craved love and acceptance, yet his actions often pushed people away. He had built a life of wealth and power, yet often found himself alone, misunderstood, or mistrusted. Even his own children, of whom he had 9, reportedly kept a careful distance during his darkest years, unsure of who their father had become. Fame can distort a man's soul, but in Mel Gibson's case, it nearly shattered it. Professionally, there were glimmers of revival. In 2016, he returned to directing with Hacksaw Ridge, a World War II film based on the true story of Desmond Doss, a pacifist combat medic who saved 75 men without ever firing a gun. The film was a critical triumph, earning 6 Academy Award nominations and 2 wins. Gibson himself was nominated for Best Director, a stunning reversal no one saw coming. It felt like a resurrection, not just of a career, but of a man. But the applause was muted, cautious. The industry didn't cheer the way it once did. And while Hacksaw Ridge reminded the world of his cinematic brilliance, it didn't erase the pain, the memories, or the damage done. Behind closed doors, Mel still struggled. The fame, the pressure, the expectation, it was all still there, but dulled now, like a faded photograph. He moved in and out of relationships, never quite finding the peace he had searched for his entire life. His faith remained, but so did his fears. The world had moved on, but he remained frozen in the echo chamber of his past. And in moments of rare vulnerability, he would admit it. The thing he missed most wasn't the awards or the spotlight. It was the simple connection, the feeling that people saw him as a human being, not a headline. Mel Gibson at 70 is not the man we once knew. He is a weathered soul, scarred, humbled, and still searching. Some still can't forgive him. Others have quietly welcomed him back into the fold. But no one can deny the complexity of his journey. He was the warrior of Braveheart, the renegade cop of Lethal Weapon, the visionary behind the Passion of the Christ. And yet, beyond the roles and the recognition, he remains something far more tragic. A man at war with himself, still trying to make peace with what he has done and what he has lost. At 70, Mel Gibson walks through life as a man permanently altered by the love he once knew, the rage he couldn't control, and the silence that followed when the applause finally faded. There's something haunting about seeing a legend age, especially one whose career once burned with such intensity. Today, he is not the cultural centerpiece he once was. You don't see him headlining blockbusters or leading studio campaigns. You see glimpses, supporting roles, brief interviews, independent projects that nod to the past but never quite recapture it. The man who once stood atop the industry now moves in its margins. And yet, in this quieter chapter of his life, Mel Gibson has perhaps found something he never truly had before. Stillness. But it's a stillness laced with sorrow. Not just for what he lost, but for how he lost it. Friends like Jodie Foster and Robert Downey Jr. came to his defense during the worst moments, urging forgiveness and understanding. But forgiveness in the public eye is conditional. For many, the wounds he caused, through his words, his rage, his choices, are still too deep. And that's the tragedy of it all. Not just the fall, but the inability to ever fully return. In a world where cancel culture and second chances often clash, Mel Gibson remains a complicated figure, brilliant and broken, influential and infamous, remembered and rejected, still even now. There are moments that reveal the man behind the mythology. Those close to him speak of a deep sense of regret, a longing to repair what can no longer be undone. He continues to make films, not for glory but for expression. He mentors young artists, he spends time with his children, and in rare public appearances he seems softer, quieter, humbled by time and by truth. His voice doesn't carry the same thunder it once did, but there's wisdom in its weathered tone. It's the voice of a man who has survived not just Hollywood, but himself. And yet the sadness that clings to his story is undeniable. Because Mel Gibson could have been more. He could have gone down in history as one of the greatest actor-directors to ever grace the screen. Instead, his name is often followed by a comma, and then a caveat. Mel Gibson, the one who said that. Mel Gibson, the one who fell apart. The legacy is fractured, not erased. but no longer pure. And in that fracture lies the heartbreak. He wasn't brought down by one moment, but by a pattern of pain left unresolved for too long. As the sun sets on the third act of his life, we're left with the question, what truly defines a man? His worst moments, or his attempts to make them right? For Mel Gibson, that answer may remain unfinished. He is still here, still creating, still battling demons, though perhaps more quietly now. And maybe that's the most human part of his story. He hasn't given up. He still believes there's something worth salvaging. Not for the fame, not for the fans, but for himself. Because beneath the legend, the scandal, the tragedy, Mel Gibson is still just a man. And like all men, he wants what we all want, to be seen and to be forgiven.